Good morning. Hello and welcome to Colliers' webinar on ESG entitled Adapt or Fail, How to Future-Proof Against the Climate Crisis. The subject has been specifically chosen to coincide with COP26, which started in Glasgow on Sunday. Aptly, this was Halloween, and following that theme, we aim to scare you all just a little bit today with discussions on specifically how landlords need to respond to the ever-changing sustainability landscape starting now, and how to take practical steps to avoid a stranded asset as we head closer to key dates in the sustainability agenda. What will be required of you is frankly non-negotiable, and the implications of not being prepared would be potentially disastrous in terms of your ability to let your property and the impact that may have on valuations. I am aware that trustees are getting a lot of coverage on the investment side for ESG, but I understand that there hasn't been much as yet covering off the practical side and the implication and the impact on landlords. This is why we have specifically brought together experts from across Colliers business, including valuations, project and building consultancy, and national offices. And they will cover residential, retail, and office asset classes, which we understand are of most importance to our trustee clients. You will have to plan ahead to ensure that any work you need to carry out will coincide with natural intervention points, such as lease expiry or break options, and have all the necessary trades available to carry out the planned work at a cost that you can budget for. The teams at Colliers are here to provide you with practical options, advice, and tips to manage the process you will have to undertake. Next slide, please. Let me introduce you to our four panelists. Andreas Guzman is Head of Sustainability. Andreas leads the ongoing development and implementation of the Colliers Sustainability Strategy, which focuses on helping investor and occupier clients to improve their ESG performance and manage associated risk. He has over 13 years experience driving responsible growth, having previously focused on integrating ESG criteria in investment strategies, sitting and chairing ESG committees and various asset management firms in the UK, and managing compliance with EU carbon legislation. Andreas is a regular presenter on sustainability topics and represents Colliers on various industry groups. He has been part of the Colliers team for over 5 years. Next, we will have Ayo Ajaji. He's a director of the Project and Building Consultancy unit. Ayo is a chartered quantity surveyor who specializes in providing cost advice to clients for commercial, residential, and residential projects and mixed-use schemes in London and the surrounding regions. He has advised on over 1.5 billion of construction costs on a wide range of projects across various sectors. He has led a number of projects both during, pre- and post-contract stages, providing cost and procurement advice and contract administration services to clients and managing design teams to work within set budgets. Our third panelist will be Sarah Duncan, Head of Valuation and Advisory Services. Sarah leads our UK Valuation and Advisory Services team and has experience in real estate development, finance, and investment strategy. The Valuation team has an ESG focus group, which supports clients on addressing sustainability challenges on values and returns. Sarah undertook her first sustainable investment review over 10 years ago for the Crown Estate, an organisation that has become a leader in responsible asset management. And finally, we will hear from Mike Hawkins, a director and head of National Office Agency and Development in the UK regions. Mike has over 28 years experience in the real estate profession, focused on the northwest of England, but with particular emphasis on Manchester city centre. He is based in Colliers' Manchester office, and he offers a depth and breadth of commercial experience to investors, developers, landlords, and occupiers, with particular regard to complex mixed-use schemes with a focus on procurement of planning, development, letting, and disposal of city centre office schemes. He deals with all aspects of office agency, where he has been one of the principal protagonists for the evolution of Manchester's city centre office market. His role includes providing developers and investors a unique insight into occupational requirements, which now has a strong ESG focus, and how they should and will influence the design criteria of complex refurbishment projects. There will be an opportunity to ask the panel questions at the end of the presentations. You can use the Q&A function, which you will find at the foot of your screen. Questions can be directed to a specific panel member or can be left open and can be posted anonymously if you prefer. I am sure you will find their presentations very interesting, if not a little scary. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Adrian. Hello, everyone. So look, I'm going to set the scene, and I'm going to start by saying that the world of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, has gone viral. ESG factors are being pushed across the board, and the timeline that you see on the screen right now shows a selection of key events, anything ranging from national commitments to net zero, far-reaching regulation and disclosure requirements, and an important milestones in terms of sustainable debt issuance. And all of these highlight the scale of change that we've seen recently. And I think it's fair to say that in the last couple of years, we've seen more change in this space than perhaps in the last 2 decades. And look, the overlying message here is that ESG is now a competitive matter. More and more, we're seeing a systematic approach being applied to identify and manage ESG issues at portfolio level, ultimately to protect, but in some cases also to enhance asset value, and of course to fulfill fiduciary duties. And there's a common theme in many of these events, and that's the race to net zero. So we know climate change has topped the risk charts for the last few years, and we've seen that in the news. And what the science is telling us is that we have little time to limit irreversible changes. So governments as well as businesses have reacted by committing to net zero. And there's still a bit of work to do, as we saw at the start of COP26 this week. But the UK in particular gets kudos for being the first major economy to legally commit to net zero. And it's also worth highlighting that the UK was also the first major economy to ask the question, can we get to net zero? The good news is that the government's independent advisor, the Climate Change Committee, published a number of reports basically saying that yes, we can indeed reach net zero, but not just that, we can do it in time and we can afford it while remaining competitive. So some businesses, on the other hand, are going much faster than governments. The likes of Microsoft, for example, are committing to a bigger target by 2030, which is incredibly ambitious. At the same time, there has been a strong reaction from the real estate investment community in the UK in particular, setting targets and committing to report on their progress on an annual basis, which is obviously very important because in the last couple of years, we saw a lot of ambition, and what we need to see now is action and accountability. And there are some international frameworks that are enabling that accountability, such as the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is a credible way to set a net zero target, and an initiative that reached an important milestone in September last year in terms of the number of companies adhering to the methodology, one of which is Colliers, I'm happy to say. And that number has since more than tripled. So the trend is going exponential. And if we can move to the next slide, please. So look, to frame that net zero challenge for the real estate industry, here are some stats that is worth keeping in mind. So First of all, the construction and operation of buildings is responsible for a big chunk of global emissions. And when we look at it from a UK or a European perspective, that figure is very similar. We also know that most of the buildings that will remain in 2050 have already been built. And there's only a few of them that are currently meeting net zero standards. So the real challenge is going to be retrofitting those buildings. And you can see from the stats on the right-hand side that we're not doing great in terms of the rate of renovation across Europe, which is currently around 1%. So there needs to be a significant increase in governments and putting the pressure on landlords to do so via regulation, as we have seen with the minimum energy efficiency standards in the UK, which I'll come to in a minute. So there's a need to renovate these buildings, and at the same time, we need to achieve energy savings that are significant when we do so. And the technology to make that a reality is available right now. But if we look at the percentage of our renovations that achieve a significant energy reduction, that's even lower than the current rate of renovation. So it's a huge challenge, and every building is different, and it will ultimately be an investment decision. But why is important to achieve energy savings in particular? Well, because in that trajectory to net zero, the grid is going to play a part as we add more renewable energy, but reducing energy demand from buildings is going to be crucial. And if we go to the next slide, please. What you see on the screen on the left-hand side is the definition of a net zero building by the UK Green Building Council. And you can see that the first thing that they say is that a net zero building is a highly efficient building. And this is important because we haven't really been paying much attention to the actual operational performance of buildings. You know, take EPCs or BREEAM assessments. You might have a building that was designed to a very high standard, but if it's poorly run, it will produce a lot of carbon during its operation. And we see this becoming a key parameter to define whether a building is going to be net zero or not. And ultimately, we believe there's going to be a two-tier market in terms of buildings that are net zero or are not net zero. And this is certainly worth reviewing for your portfolios. So from an occupier perspective, if you're looking for a space and you have a net zero target, very soon you're going to be asking the question of what's the energy intensity of a particular building, and there's already industry guidance for that, as you can see on the right hand side. And I'm sure that on top of that, we're going to have a BREEAM net zero standard coming up anytime soon that is going to align with that criteria. So landlords with compliant buildings are going to be able to say to tenants, look, come to our building and slash your carbon footprint from day one. That's going to be a very strong proposition out there. So what I'm trying to say is that market forces are definitely going to be a driver, and again, there's a stampede of corporates right now committing to net zero. So the demand for energy efficient buildings is only going to grow. You're going to have to also consider certain well-being parameters, but I think the path is clear. So let's look at now at the regulation that is driving parts of this change. So the minimum energy efficiency standards set a minimum rating before leases can be legally granted or renewed, and that minimum is currently an E. And we are approaching the hard deadline in 2023, which is when the requirement will extend to all existing leases. So if you have a tenant in situ and your building has an EPC of an F or a G, then you will automatically be in breach of the legislation at that point. And that minimum is going to be lifted to a B in 2030. And what that really means is that any intervention that you do from now on your assets is going to have an impact on achieving that requirement and also on achieving net zero. So one of the things that we are doing with asset managers is to help them review asset strategies well in advance of any planned changes required, taking into account leasing cycles and anticipating any potential technical challenges to avoid being in a situation where the most optimal route cannot be practically implemented. So think, for example, replacing a gas boiler when it comes to the end of its life. That might be an opportunity to move to an electric system, so a heat pump system, for example. And look, a lot of the questions that we get asked around this bit of legislation are about enforcement, and that's in the hands of the local authorities. But what we're saying is that the real enforcement is actually being driven by the lending sector. So MEES has led the banks to align their lending strategies to promote compliance. So maybe the next time that you speak to your lender, they're probably going to ask you about your strategy to meet that minimum criteria. So look, to summarize, the existing stock is going to be the real challenge, and therefore, the target of legislation. Deep retrofits are going to be required to achieve the energy performance levels to meet that net zero standard. And every building is different, and there are going to be some technicalities that you're going to have to take into account. But beyond that technical specification, there needs to be a holistic assessment for the investment case. So what type of occupiers are you going to target, and how much rent are they going to be prepared to pay? So all of that poses the risk for stranded assets. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Ayo. So thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. Thanks for the context. So my segment of the presentation is really just to bring the context into the UK construction market. I think we're all aware of the rising prices, the challenges we've got with availability and lead-in times. I just wanted to look through some of those issues a bit more keenly, but really re-emphasizing, similar to what Andreas was saying, you really have one or two options. One is sit back, as many are doing, to see what happens. Quite reactionary, or the second option is to have a proactive approach, working with someone like Colliers to have a thought out strategy to try and minimize some of the concerns that are in the current market. So looking at the UK market, we've been engaging with main contractors, subcontractors, just to really understand what their concerns were, and really to see where the market is. There's obviously reduced supply of raw materials, and this is really led on from the large increase of demand, which has come globally off the back of the post-pandemic recovery. There's also demand due to significant issues on cladding projects and other construction projects such as HS2. Key materials, particularly steel, and I'll talk in the next few slides specifically around that, which have seen major price inflation. And then labor rates are increasing. So there's the high demand due to the commercial and the infrastructure projects, but also a reduction in skilled labor available, partly due to some EU nationals returning home. And then there's the wage inflation. Next slide, please. So in addition to, savings on increasing cost of energy and water, and as well as the future cost of carbon emissions, decarbonisation is vital if owners and managers really want to avoid the issue of stranded assets. What I've got here is a chart really just showing, it's focused mainly on the carbon risk real estate monitor method assessment and also the science-based targets. But what it's demonstrating is at 2029 is when the first kind of stranding event. So this is separate to the warnings kind of heeded by Andreas as to the 2023 targets. And if there's no retrofit intervention, you've also got another further stranding event at 2039. Whilst it may seem a while off, like I say, 2029, I just wanted to, I hope that the next few slides in terms of the challenges in the current UK market will re-emphasize why now is the time to look at your assets. Now is the time to produce a strategy. Next slide, please. So here I've really just looked at a snapshot of some of the concerns that contractors had and some of their key challenges. Key thing I really want to highlight is that political instability, government red tape relating to Brexit and COVID really sit around the bottom of the concerns. And circa about 18 months to 12 months ago, it was the preeminent risk or concern from contractors. That's now been replaced by the rising cost of construction and the skilled labor shortages. So it's a real challenge. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to start with the lead times. So lead times, I'm going to use flooring cladding partitions really as an example. You can see lead times, and this is from the beginning of the year. You can see that there's 4 weeks extension. So if you are procuring items now, it's taken 4 weeks longer to get to site. Now this is having a real challenge on site. As you can imagine, a lot of the retrofit works happen on floor plates, small floor plates, and usually the fit out programs are relatively short. So it means we need to place orders a lot quicker. It means that we need to design a lot quicker. Next slide, please. So then talking about the average price, I'm gonna look at really structural steel there. So structural steel, we're showing an increase of 52%. There was a note that was sent around to all contractors for orders on steel. So that was British Steel, and there was a temporary, I won't say ban, but a temporary subcharge placed on all their orders, and it was circa £30 a ton. Now, considering the increases that we've already seen over the last 18 months, this was a surprise. I guess the biggest surprise was that 25 of the 30 increase was due to rising energy prices. So this is something that hasn't fully come through, but something that we're expecting to come through. So there's more challenges as the cost of production is increasing. We're all seeing that in our energy bills. So again, there's a further challenge and concern around the cost of production. But here you could see that there's been significant increase. Not all of this increase is fed as viciously as shown here, because contractors have been able to swallow as much as possible moving forward. But as we've been discussing and as we've slowly started to see, costs are increasing. Next slide, please. And the final for what I'd call, this perfect storm is the challenge around labour. So one, the availability of labour, the lack of skilled labour is a challenge. But the increase in projects such as the infrastructure projects and markets, we're seeing dry liners leaving site because they've been offered more on a site across the road. This again is a challenge. There are ways to circumvent that, and we're working with subcontractors to do so. But this is again just highlighting the challenge of the issue. Next slide, please. So M&E, again, I just wanted to highlight, on most retrofit projects, we're looking at M&E plant, significant elements of construction. So the HVAC, which will be required on near enough every commercial building, it has an increase of about 92%. Air handling units are up 52%, and then you've got your sprinkler installations at 33%. So again, this is the increase in raw materials such as copper and steel. have really driven a lot of this cost change. We are beginning to see things taper off slightly, but again, not just here to scare you. I just wanted to give a real snapshot of the UK market. Next shot, please. Next slide, please. So what's our advice? Hopefully I've painted the urgency of the issue. Andreas has said, and I want to re-emphasize the need to look and review your strategy now. Now is the time to look at your strategy. With regards to a proactive strategy, and this is whether it's individual buildings, a portfolio, or a hybrid approach. You know, Colliers, we are working alongside our sustainability teams, alongside Andreas, and clients, really helping to avoid some of the costs it's very hard because, you know, it's hard to totally eliminate, you know, the increased costs. What I'm saying to clients is the better plan that we have, the earlier you start your plan, the more likely we are going to be able to find other ways, more innovative ways. Also, we can engage the market a lot quicker, making your projects a lot more attractive and therefore making clients keen, contractors keen to bid. It also gives them some more certainty on their pipeline and allows them to plan ahead. Continued emphasis on planning, monitoring, and information gathering. So I know that what we're saying today might be quite scary for those that are at the beginning of their journey. However, we can help to very quickly look at your state of play and really work with you to get that strategy to first, you know, for day one, understand what your initial budgets may be, and then work with you to try and tailor the budgets accordingly. If we can also agree contract terms up front once we move through, we know that longer payment terms are becoming less palatable. So if we can have those discussions early on with contractors, we can find ways of safeguarding your position. And then also just employ the right team. It's really important to have a team. Just touch a bit more on the Colliers projects and building consultancy. We pride ourselves on the fact that we have good reach nationally. So we're working with a lot of clients up and down the country. Where we help to manage the project, so therefore we're working to help appoint the architects, appoint the design engineers, and then really working with clients, partnering with clients to drive their projects forward. So like I say, quite scary. However, if you do start now and get the right team on board, there are ways to mitigate some of the concerns. Thank you.
Thanks, Ayo. So hi, yes, I'm Sarah Duncan in the Valuation team, and I'm just going to show a few slides about the impact that sustainability and ESG, environmental social governance, is having generally on the market from what we're seeing. So this slide here presents the summary of a survey that was undertaken by the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. They asked for thousands of responses from around 30 countries, and you can read all about it in the sustainability report. It's a very quick read, but I thought this slide was particularly interesting because the graph here shows that around 50% of respondents believe that a green premium is emerging now for both rental and capital values. That's quite a large increase on previous years. And a further 30% believe that a brown discount will apply to less sustainable properties. These are fairly high level responses, but I think they're a really good barometer of the current sentiment in the marketplace. And remember, this comes from all around the world, it's not just the UK. So obviously you have COP26 on at the moment, and they are actually hosting some sessions on green finance and also on the built environment. And so I think we're likely to see a lot more pledges around sustainability and net zero from across the whole real estate sector as a result of that conference. So we work very closely with the RICS in valuations, and if I just go on to the next slide, I'll just summarise some work that's been coming out of them very recently. So only last month, they issued a draft guidance note on how to incorporate sustainability in valuations. I think we've seen a lot of rapid action from stakeholders, and a lot of commitments, but the problem is it's very difficult to quantify any form of green premium or brand discount at the moment, because it's not specifically articulated when the transactions happen. But and I think one of the reasons of that is really because various market participants have different priorities or definitions about what they want to achieve with their sustainability objectives. So they can vary among the stakeholders. And so the RICS has attempted to bring some sort of consistency to the valuation market. And this guidance note, importantly, it does say that valuations, we're really there to reflect the market and not to lead them. And this is a very important point. So we can only act with the data that we can obtain or that we're provided with. And this is where probably, I think, more transparency from agents and lenders and investors and fund managers, that could really help improve valuations and the consistency across the market, because I think it would offer a lot more transparency on the sustainability element in pricing. And we're not just talking about sustainability now, we're also looking at social impact. So what impact the building has on the community around it, not just, you know, the actual sort of energy efficiency of a building. There's a much wider set of circumstances you have to consider. So anyway, you can see the key areas of focus on this slide. This is what the valuers are looking at now, and it's going to be, once the guidance actually becomes formalised after its consultation period, there should be more consideration here really of how would that property perform over the whole period of its investment, or the loan term if it's a loan. So we're probably looking 3, 5, 10 years on a horizon of that kind of length for anything we value now. So it's not just about getting a market value today, we have to consider how resilient is this property, what issues might it have, what capex might be required. Obviously, there's some very big questions, they are. So that leads obviously onto considerations about the obsolescence or the liquidity of the property. Will it let quickly? Will it sell quickly? Will it get left behind? These stranded assets that we talk about. There's also quite a lot of legislation and regulation that's just continually evolving. So we're having to now become sort of paralegals to know exactly what it is a building should have and what it's missing. Obviously, EPC certificates have been around for a long time, as have various other forms of sustainability credentials like LEED and BREEAM. But the standards are always evolving. As Adrian said at the start of the presentation, I was first approached by various clients about this about 10 years ago or slightly before, and the standards then about what was a sustainable building that people invest a lot of money into, often beyond the market value, those are now probably falling behind because they don't meet current day standards. So it's always a matter of keeping on top of things. Anyway, when we actually put these considerations into the valuations, we're really looking at items such as void periods, lettability, yields, capex. All these financial adjustments we will now be making to the valuations to reflect any sustainability shortcomings. I suspect that probably for the time being we won't be adding green premiums explicitly on top of these valuations, because it is something that's a little bit intangible at the moment and very difficult to prove through comparable evidence. Anyway, I think this is a really good start to achieving some sort of consistency in the marketplace. And I think that the discussion around sustainability, a lot of the key firms are talking about it now, and our clients are very, very hot on this, especially some of the institutions. So I think that this is something that's going to move quite rapidly over the next year or two. And obviously this impacts loan security valuations and financial reporting, all sorts of things. So it is going to be quite big in the next few years. So anyway, if I just move on to my last slide, this is something, as I mentioned, the kind of areas where we're seeing the impact of this valuation, where we think it will be going over the next 5 years in practice. And I think COP26 really has focused minds on the impacts of sustainability. Lots of people pledging net zero, and so therefore a lot of very specific targets going into being outlined by the various sector leadership and the trade associations. So you'll see here RICS, the Appraisal Institute, which is actually a US-based organisation. We try and watch what they're doing as well, because a lot of our clients are global, so we have to have regard to what their global outlook is. And we have leaders like the UK Green Building Council, Green Finance Institute. There's plenty more around that are doing this, but these are the ones that probably I've seen the most literature come out of in recent months. And obviously down on the finance and the fund level, we've got FCA and Presti and ARIF. They're all bringing out their own guidance, which I think, again, will really help with consistency. So the kind of work that we're doing with our clients at the moment really is around asset reviews and risk assessments. So one example of that would be to look at a number of properties in a portfolio and run 2 scenarios over 5 to 10 years, because we're trying to really capture some of that legislation and the standards that are improving. And from that, we can examine the impact on values and returns of that asset. And we have the first scenario is to reflect all the things that Andreas and Ayo were talking about, which is looking at sustainability upgrades and the associated costs, but also the associated savings on those properties. So that can give you the sort of the best case scenario, if you like. And then we also run the do nothing scenario, which is not always negative. Sometimes there's possibly, it's not worth putting the money into a building because it's probably never going to reach an outcome. So it's worth what it's worth. But sometimes properties don't really need that much, just a few tweaks here and there to actually bring to improve the returns and perhaps not just enhance the value, but to maintain it over the course of the investment or the loan term. But what this is really good at is really identifying the extreme cases. So if you have a portfolio, it can identify sort of the bottom 5% of properties maybe that you need to have a really good hard think about what you're going to do with those, whether to invest in those or to exit them. So in summary, I would say that the valuations are starting to reflect sustainability factors. We're able to quantify some of them a little less difficult to pin down at the moment, but as the market evidence grows and transactions start to really illustrate these premiums or discounts, then I think that the impact on valuation will become a lot more marked. So we think that it's possible that a 2-tier market may emerge, definitely within the next 5 years, maybe over the next 2 to 3 years. It is a very diverse marketplace after all, but especially at the institutional end, all of our clients in the institutional sector are very, very keen on ensuring that they have green portfolios or sustainable portfolios. So we think that probably, at least at that end, there will be a 2-tier market evolving. So I'll probably just hand over to Mike at this stage, because he's out there at the sharp end of the market and he can provide you all his insights on what he's really seeing on the ground in the transactions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. So before I start my session, I'll just have a bit of a coffee. Hope you're all still awake. Strap yourselves in. We've listened about the theory, the regulations, and a whole industry that seems to be completely embedded with acronyms. What Colliers has is a way to lead you through a pathway to wealth preservation and wealth creation. So next slide, please. Never before have I, in my career, seen such a bewildering array of regulations that have come in and influencing this topic of discussion. So we've got BREEAM, we've got SCAR, we've got LEED, we've got BCO, we've got Carbon Trust, we've got this route, that route, Wired Scored, Smart Score, MEES, Neighbours. But it's like there are going to be organisations out there that will offer their services and they will tell you you've got to have everything. And that's why I've plucked out this heading. You can't build or reposition your buildings for compliance. You've got to build it for performance. So go to the next slide, please. So everyone is articulating their views, but and yeah, one has to be respectful to the regulations, the guidance notes, but everyone's forgetting one thing. Focus on the first area, occupiers, and perspective from corporates. So what's very interesting, and Colliers have undertaken an awful lot of data in terms of the number of corporates, top 100, top 250, and just general businesses that have committed in their accounts. They've committed to comply by certain seminal dates as to the type of occupation and accommodation that they will physically be in. So there are quite some seminal dates by 2030. A lot of the real estate teams within these corporate organizations are still asking real estate advisors to commit to new 10-year leases and then realizing that if you commit to a new 10-year lease, that takes you beyond 2030. So then they realize that they need a tenant's break. But the most valuable and important insight I can give you is that the one trend that I have experienced right across the UK is that the employees, the talent, are now interviewing companies and saying, where do you stand on this moral position? What is your philosophy? What is your commitment to occupying accommodation, not just offices, but right across the board? And does it actually fit my beliefs? And so never before have the employees made a statement, and they're going to influence the success or failure of employers. So the leadership teams within companies and the people overseeing real estate portfolios need to wise up very quickly. Now, there's lots of talk, and once again, in terms of regulations, they influence different types of property. So it's quite easy for people to take inspiration and interpretation of the regulations on ground-up developments. But the most challenging area of discussion is how you repurpose, refurbish existing premises. And that's almost a cerebral solution that hasn't actually been embedded in the wider professional industry. So everyone is looking at various regulations and influencing design criteria. But the real focus on a large amount of portfolio is what do we do with existing premises? And lots of talk in the chat rooms and in the press and in the industry is when landlords will take their position if they're proactive. But actually, the market is already speaking. And the occupiers are going to vote with their feet, and they're going to operate break options. They are going to leave premises. But from my perspective, you can be reactive rather than measured, reflective, and implement a strategy that actually works for you. And that's the other thing. In our industry, there are so many organizations that are advocating strategies, policies. You need to do this, you need to do the other. But they're not actually taking into account that throughout the UK and throughout different parts of London, there are accommodation that generate different rental profiles. So you can't have one solution that will fit all real estate properties. You've got to have a bespoke solution right across the piece. And in terms of what does make me smile is the extent and depth of institutional money, investor appetite, where they say, I've raised 500 million for a sustainable ESG fund. And if you speak to a lot of their real estate advisors, you say, okay, what's your interpretation of the credentials for a property that would be acquired in that sustainable ESG fund? And the stock response is, it has a roof garden, and we've got some really good well-being initiatives, and they sell drinks in jam jars. It's really trendy. So what's Colliers' position on all this? Well, our position is to guide you, to hold your hand firmly and lead you through in a cost-effective solution. I'm not going to talk for ages. I'm going to canter through some slides because you can review this at your leisure on YouTube. But just pictorially, I wanted to pop up here a summary of a lot of the acronyms, and it's an interpretation. So it's like going to an accountant and saying, HMRC have told me that I've got to pay tax. And then the response is, yeah, you've got to pay tax. Well, I think where Colliers is different is how we can bespoke a cost-effective solution that you can implement and actually say, you've got to be very careful about this area of guidance or regulations. This one, you don't have to be so careful. And this one is just looking to extract money from you because their branding is great and they're telling you that you need your building or your portfolio to have this accreditation. Next slide, please. So lots of people have said, what's the biggest influence in design, the impact on occupancy? Is it the pandemic? No, it's this document. The REBA Sustainable Outcomes Guide 2019 is a document that all of your colleagues should have read, or you don't need to read it. You can go to someone who has read it and can interpret it for you. But that is going to have the greatest influence in terms of an occupier's perspective and a landlord, owner of the premises perspective. Next slide, please. Trying to cut through all of the noise, a high proportion of the contribution to the carbon in the atmosphere is obviously the production, the procurement of materials, and obviously that's different from ground up and different from repurposing a property. But once again, this is where owners of property and their team, the choice of the professional team, the choice of the right architect, the choice of the organizations that will actually advise you that you can repurpose your building in a cost-effective fashion. You've got to make sure you get your team correct for the job in hand. But you can't design a building and you can't repurpose a building without looking how it's going to function. So the management strategy is absolutely key. Otherwise, you spend the money, you repurpose it, or you repurpose it around occupiers. And then because the operational regime isn't set in place, it's going to fall flat on its face. Next slide, please. There are, I say, a number of documents that you need to be aware of. I'm not going to go through these, but if you just canter through the next few slides, Chanel. So that's the United Nations global goals, and some of them are cross-referenced amongst the REBA sustainable outcomes. Next slide. So Karen, go forward. So actually dwindling down and taking out the ones that can be influenced in the United Kingdom. Next slide. Focus on these ones, which are a blend of how you repurpose buildings and then how you operate buildings. Next slide. And this is a really key slide. And this is almost the Bible that occupiers are looking at, and also landlords and organizations controlling buildings, as to what those seminal dates are. So there are seminal dates on the horizon: 25, 2030, 2036. And picking up on what Ayo said, there's two approaches, reactive and proactive. But your proactive approach will actually, the tempo will be increased by market forces in terms of occupiers vacating. They are going to be canvassed by building owners who've actually repositioned their buildings. And they're going to reposition because they can't afford to be in buildings that don't actually comply with the ethical and corporate philosophical statement that's been made in the press, and therefore a commitment to shareholders, or more importantly, how you're going to attract and retain talent and have low attrition rates. Next slide, please. So this is just really an example of a building. It was a building that hadn't been touched for 50 years, and a building that had been occupied. And it was a building in Manchester that was driven by Federate Hermes, but it was repositioned, and it had the highest credentials and managed to secure 3 occupiers: Amazon, WeWork, and Deloitte. And the purpose of putting this slide up is that you can reposition buildings in a very cost-effective fashion, but actually secure occupiers who really are committing to a new way of operating out of existing repurposed premises. And I think, why are occupiers gravitating to buildings that have been repurposed right across the UK at different rental points? Because the ability to attract and retain employees, to attract the talent, is the most influential impact on the performance of real estate. If you don't curate your accommodation, that doesn't mean you have to overspend, because good design doesn't cost money. But if you don't get your act together, you are going to be overseeing and responsible for a massive reduction in value because you've been asleep at the wheel. And what I would say is that no one will ever comply 100% with a route to carbon net zero on a repurposing or refurbishing strategy. But what you can do is demonstrate that you are repositioning in a cost-effective fashion and adhering to a sustainable ESG strategy that stands up to scrutiny. And so I don't want people to think, oh God, the end of the world is nigh. I need to give up and drown my sorrows with a glass of wine. There is a solution, and you don't have to overspend either in terms of appraising what can be done in a measured and focused approach. The next slide is, I was very pleased to be involved in the design, and this is where there was a patron. And what's fascinating about this, the co-op group actually set the standard of the sustainable agenda in the United Kingdom. And this building was conceived in 2009, 2010, and then influenced local authority philosophy in Manchester, then Birmingham, and then Bristol. But the point being is that good design can actually accelerate the whole approach of districts and cities and the way people think. There is very much hope. Chanel, if you can go back to the first slide with the 4 different tombs in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4. I can have another sip of coffee now. So my focus is on repurposing existing premises, but the message I'd like to get to the audience is there is a cost-effective way forward. And the point of the image on point 3 and the question that's been raised in the discussion from some of my colleagues, is there a premium rent? 100%. There is a premium rent paid, and this is a building in Bristol which will redefine rental values. But this isn't a cost. What we're seeing is occupiers right across the rental spectrum will commit to premises that they view will generate value in terms of the way their business will flourish and continue to thrive. So whereas valuers and development advisors will say, or the professional team, that is the cost, it's not a cost. It's an investment which will lead to lower attrition rates, less voids, and actually long-term secure income. So occupiers don't mind committing to what a number of people in the profession would perceive to be an enhanced or increased rent or an increased initial cost. If you look at the overall operational cost of occupying that building during a life cycle period over a 10-15 year, the overall cost is lower if you commit to a well-designed building. And I reinforce that, yeah, back in 2010, when the co-op were patrons of that building, the procurement cost was probably 25 to 30% more. But now, if you get the right professional team, picking up what AO was mentioning, if you procure the right materials and you actually plan ahead, the premium should not be any more than 8 to 12%, but your rental performance and your low attrition rates will far outperform the initial repositioning costs. So I'm really positive about the way forward, but you have to be aware that there are some significant drivers influencing the way occupiers and their advisors evaluate building solutions. But we're in a very good place because at least we've got occupiers to take our clients' buildings. I'll hand back to Chanel, who will seamlessly hand back to Adrian. That's the end of my chat. Cheers.
That seems to have worked. Thank you very much, all 4 of you, for your very interesting and thought-provoking presentations there. Right, we have only 7 minutes left before our hour is up. I've got some questions which I'd like to put to you. First of all, let's have a look. Quite a relatively easy one to answer, I think. Are you able to assist with property assets outside of the UK? Well, I think the short answer to that is yes, but it depends where they are. I mean, Colliers is a global company, and we have representation throughout the world. Well, but when I say throughout the world, I'm not talking of every single country. So, you know, if you do have questions about assets in particular geographical locations, please let us know, and we will do our very best to point you in the right direction for some advice and assistance. Another one here, Mike. Is there much evidence for the difference in rental premium for retrofitted assets that now meet environmental accreditations compared to newly developed assets built with these accreditations in mind, who would arguably attract a rental premium for being the newest stock on the market?
So the simple answer is yes. So once again, a number of corporate, well, first of all, Colliers has undertaken a lot of research in terms of lease expiry dates, not just the top 250 FTSE companies, but companies across the UK. And there are almost two types of organisations: those that will really research the history of the building being repurposed. So the protection of, say, retaining an existing building in terms of its concrete frame and various other components, and to what extent there is an intrusive repositioning, they will take the view that that is actually more laudable in terms of the way that they assess the credentials of that building compared to a ground-up building. It's interesting, in terms of a ground-up building, and if you look at the accreditation versus the neighbours scoring, almost all envelopes will now be 60% solid, 40% glass, but a high proportion of that in terms of green walls. To get the thickness, I'm speaking in a layman's language, to get the thickness of the wall will impact on the net income producing area, and that has different impacts on how those buildings are going to be assessed and what the operational life cycle costs are. So do we have evidence of companies that will commit to repurpose buildings and pay a premium? Yes, we do. And I can talk to whoever you are offline and prove that in both business park campus locations as well as urban settings. But what we're seeing is that companies are committing to that type of product, and in depth, not like one swallow makes a summer. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mike. Next one, and anybody is welcome to take this. You've mentioned that Colliers has a reach nationwide, but what else does Colliers offer that other service providers in this space don't?
We're joined up. And I think that that's a key thing. So first of all, we're talking about particular asset class, but our approach is very much other disciplines, so restaurants, logistics, hotel, but where we're different is as a key part of a professional team, we'll ensure that the client doesn't receive advice in silos, but we oversee and interpret and guide the client in the most cost-effective fashion. And I think that going back to the question about are we global, in the London office, our European team are based here, that very much connect into the whole of the globe. So Andres is like a lightning conductor, has direct connection to all other European and American and Asian organizations. So we're quite fortunate that it's very accessible. And the one thing Colliers can do, either physically or in teams, if you want to reach out, we can get the individuals, our colleagues across the globe, on the end of a screen, or set up face-to-face meeting if you can travel. But how we differ ourselves is we don't just regurgitate theory, we translate that into practical reality and in a cost-effective fashion.
Thank you, Mike. I think we've just got time for one more. Andreas, what do you think the easiest first step all commercial landlords can take in reducing their impact on the environment?
Well, first of all, they need to understand where they are during the journey. So data always plays a fundamental role in assessing what's going to be required and what benchmarks you can go and set up for your asset. So getting the data piece right is probably a good place to start. In terms of practical initiatives that you can implement for your asset, one of the easiest ones, probably not right now with the current energy prices, is to get on a green tariff. And I'm going to refer back to something that Mike mentioned, which is if you are choosing managing agents and you've got the right one, then for example, we here in Colliers, we provide certified renewable energy for our entire managed portfolio. And that has meant that if you're an SME in particular that cannot have access to those tariffs in the market, if you go with a managing agent like us that do, then automatically you are reducing your carbon footprint. There's a range of initiatives that I can talk to, to whoever asked during the question, but understanding where you sit in the journey is definitely a good place to start.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm sure, like me, you found that all very interesting. Thank you indeed to all our panelists, Andreas, Ao, Sarah, and Mike, for a fascinating insight into the legislation that surrounds ESG, the potential cost of carrying out refurbishment or repositioning work, and the effect on the valuation of your assets, and a very practical insight into how tenants view what they want and expect from properties and landlords. We have recorded this webinar, and we will provide you with a link which you can then share with any colleagues who may have missed today but you feel would have benefited from attending. There's clearly a lot to be done, and the time to start planning, if not taking action just yet, is now. The teams at Colliers are here to help. Please use us. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.